Okay, so picture this. You're in court, right? The gavel slams down, you're hit with a judgment, and it feels totally unjust.
What do you do?
Appeal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You appeal, exactly. And that's what today's deep dive is all about. Appeals in Kenya.
Sounds intriguing.
It is. We're going to be breaking down this video, unpacking appeals, your right to justice simplified. And it's really interesting stuff. It's kind of like, well, the video makes this analogy to getting a second opinion from a doctor.
Oh, I see.
Sometimes you just need another set of eyes on a situation. Right?
Makes sense, yeah. Especially in something as important as a legal case.
Exactly. And the video really stresses that in Kenya, the right to appeal, it's not just like a legal technicality.
Oh, no, not at all. It's a fundamental right.
It is. It's protected.
Absolutely. Enshrined in the Constitution.
It's like a cornerstone of their whole justice system.
Exactly. You know, it's interesting how the Kenyan court system is structured to make this multi-layered review possible.
Yeah, tell me more about that. Well, you start at the magistrate's court, which is, your kind of entry point.
Right.
And then if necessary, you can go up to the high court.
Uh-huh.
And from there, even higher to the Court of Appeal.
Okay.
And then finally, the big one, the Supreme Court.
Wow, so there are a lot of steps. It's not just like a one and done kind of deal.
Nope, definitely not. Multiple avenues, like climbing a ladder to justice.
I like that. Climbing a ladder to justice. I like that a lot. So, okay, let's say you're in that position. You just got a judgment. And you're thinking, no way, this is wrong. How do you actually kick off this appeal process?
Well, it all starts with something called a memorandum of appeal.
Memorandum of appeal.
It's basically your legal argument, but written down. You lay out exactly why you think the original judgment was messed up.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like a super persuasive letter to the judges.
Yeah, you could think of it that way, highlighting all the messed up points and backing them up with evidence.
So to make this real for our listeners, what's an example of a judgment that would need an appeal?
Okay, let's say you're in a civil case, like a fight over a contract or something, and the judge, for whatever reason, awards damages that are just way off.
Off, like how?
Like maybe they're biased or something, or they just totally misinterpreted the evidence. In that situation, your memorandum of appeal is your way to say, hold up, this isn't right. You outline where the unfairness happened and give your side of the story.
Right. Here's the proof, Your Honor. I like it. So you send in this carefully written memo. Then what? What's next in this whole legal adventure?
Well, the court takes a look at your appeal and they decide if it's even worth going further.
I see. So not every appeal gets like a full hearing.
No. They're looking for what they call substantial errors.
Substantial errors. What does that even mean?
It could be like a misinterpretation of the law.
Oh.
Or maybe some kind of procedural mistake that messed up the whole judgment. If they see something like that, then they schedule a hearing.
Interesting. So they really have to be convinced that there's a problem to even give you a hearing.
Exactly. And the hearing itself is interesting. It's not just redoing the whole trial, you know.
What happens then?
The appellate court, they dig deep. They really examine all the evidence and arguments to see if the first judgment had any cracks in it.
So they are like legal detectives, looking for clues that maybe everyone missed the first time.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And if they find something, they have options.
Like what?
Well, they could keep the original judgment.
Okay.
But they could also send the case back to the lower court.
Interesting.
Or even order a whole new trial.
Wow. So they can really shake things up.
They can. They have a lot of power to make sure things are done right.
It's amazing. You know, there's actually this case in Kenya where the Court of Appeal completely flipped a previous judgment because everyone had missed some really important evidence. The lawyers, the judge, everybody.
Wow. Really highlights how crucial this appeal process can be.
Absolutely. But hold on. What happens in the meantime while the appeal is happening? Does that first judgment just hang over your head?
That's where stay of execution comes in.
Stay of execution. Okay, now you're just using big legal words. Explain that one.
Basically, it's like hitting pause on the original judgment. While your appeal is being looked at, you can ask for this stay so that the first ruling doesn't actually affect you.
That makes sense. It wouldn't be fair to be punished for something that might actually be wrong.
Exactly. It's there to protect you while the appeal process does its thing.
We left off at the memorandum of appeal, right?
That's your first step. You're basically saying, hey, I think this judgment was wrong, and here's why.
It's like writing your legal masterpiece, laying out all your arguments and evidence in a way that's going to convince the judges.
Exactly. You want it to be clear, concise, and strong.
So you've poured your heart into writing this memo. What next? Do you just Like email it to the court and hope for the best.
There are a few more steps. You have to follow the rules, make sure everything is filed correctly and on time.
Ah, the joys of legal paperwork.
Yep. First, you need to send a copy of your appeal to the other side in the case.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
They need to know what you're arguing.
Exactly. It's about fairness and transparency.
So what else is there?
Well, there are court fees, which can be a problem for people who can't afford them.
Yeah, access to justice shouldn't just be for the rich.
I agree. And then there are deadlines. You have to file everything by a certain date, or your appeal might get thrown out.
So it's not just about having good arguments. It's also about being organized and efficient.
Exactly. But let's say you've done all that. Filed the memo, served the other party, paid the fees, and met all the deadlines. Does that guarantee you a hearing?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. How do judges decide which appeals get a full hearing?
They don't just automatically give everyone a hearing. First, they look at your appeal documents very carefully.
Really scrutinize them.
They're looking for those substantial errors we talked about earlier, problems with how the law was applied or mistakes in the process.
So it's like a filter to make sure that only the strongest cases get through.
You could say that. They want to make sure they are using their time and resources on cases where there might have been a real injustice.
So they're not wasting time on cases that are just a long shot.
Right. But let's say you make it through that initial check. The judges think your case is worth looking at and they schedule a hearing. What happens then?
Yeah, is it like a whole new trial all over again? Do you have to bring in witnesses and everything?
It's not exactly the same. The focus is different. You're not re-arguing the whole case. You're just focusing on the specific points you made in your memorandum of appeal.
So you're zeroing in on the parts where you think the lower court went wrong.
Precisely. You get to present your arguments directly to the judges and explain why you think there was a mistake.
I bet that's pretty intense, standing there in front of the judges trying to convince them.
It can be nerve-wracking, but it's your chance to make your case and potentially change the outcome.
So you have your say, the other side has their say, and then you wait for the judges to decide.
That's the gist of it. They consider everything, and then they issue a ruling.
It all comes down to that moment. What are the possible outcomes? What could happen?
Well, they could agree with the original judgment and say everything was done right.
Okay, so that's one possibility.
Or they could completely overturn it and say the first judgment was wrong.
Wow, so they have a lot of power.
They do. But there are other options too. Sometimes they send the case back to the lower court for more work.
So they're like, go back and try again.
Kind of.
Active.
Maybe they need more information or they want the lower court to reconsider some things.
And what if they think the whole process was messed up, not just the judgment?
Then they can order a whole new trial. That's like hitting the reset button on the whole case.
Whoa, start from scratch.
Exactly. This happens when they think something went really wrong in the first trial, like a procedural error or evidence that wasn't handled properly.
So it's like a safety net to make sure everyone gets a fair chance.
That's one way to look at it. It shows how important it is to have this system of appeals so that mistakes can be corrected.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even in the courts, things can go wrong. And that's why we have this right to appeal. But before we move on, I want to circle back to that whole thing about the judiciary being funded by the state. That still feels like a big problem.
It is a problem, and it's something we need to keep talking about. We talked about the ideals, about having an independent judiciary, but how do we get there?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It's not going to be easy, but we need to keep working towards it.
Well said. We'll be back in a moment to wrap up our deep dive and leave you with some things to think about. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive on appeals in Kenya. We've covered a lot of ground, the process, the different outcomes, and even some of the bigger questions about the judiciary itself.
It's been quite a journey, exploring how this right to appeal can be such a powerful tool, but also acknowledging that the system isn't perfect.
Yeah, we've really peeled back the layers and seen how complex this whole thing is. And speaking of complexities, I want to circle back to that issue of the judiciary being funded by the state. That just seems like a recipe for trouble.
It is a significant challenge. We talked about the ideal of a truly independent judiciary separate from the government, but realistically, that's a long-term goal.
Right, it's not something that's going to change overnight. So in the meantime, how do we make sure the system is as fair as possible?
It's not about throwing the whole system out. It's about making it stronger, adding safeguards, and increasing transparency.
Okay, I like that approach. What would that look like in practice?
Well, we need to ensure that judicial appointments are based solely on merit and qualifications, not political connections.
So no more backroom deals, just a clear and open process for choosing judges.
Exactly. And once judges are appointed, they need to be held accountable for their actions. That means having strong mechanisms for investigating complaints and addressing any misconduct.
So like an independent watchdog to make sure judges are following the rules.
Right. And of course, public awareness is crucial. When people understand how the system works, they can demand better.
It's all about empowering people to make a difference. But at the end of the day, even with these challenges, the right to appeal is still a vital part of a fair justice system.
I absolutely agree. It's a reminder that we should never stop striving for a more just and equitable society, and that includes constantly examining and improving our legal systems.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this thought. The right to appeal is powerful. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep pushing for a system that works for everyone.
Thank you for joining us.
And that's it for today's deep dive into appeals in Kenya. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Until next time.